Bruins Beat is brought to you by Prizepicks.
And welcome into the Bruins Beat, presented by Prizepicks. Go use that promo code CLNS to get $50 back when you play just $5. I am Evan Marinofsky. That is Conor Ryan. Connor, what is up?
Evan, I'm doing well. How you doing?
Doing great. Doing great. It's we're rounding the corner of winter, which I like. This is like, because like this week here in Boston, it was like a 50-degree day. I think there's rain, but there's 50 degrees, and we're getting, February flew by. I feel like January is like so slow. February flew.
That's great.
We're nearing the end of February, shortest month of the year. Then we're into March. It's nicer days. It's a little sunnier. I like this time. I don't hate this time of year.
Playoffs are right around the corner. Oh,
and NHL. Oh, shucks. I think our playoffs we got the last 2 weeks with the face-off.
Yeah. Seriously, enjoyed it.
I think that's what we got. 4 Nations face-off. I think that was our playoffs. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Back to the Bruins. And you were there on Saturday. I was not. I was at Cushing and Kimball Union out in Ashburnham, Mass. And so the game got over around like 7. And so I was like, I'll go watch the game somewhere, out in Ashburnham. And
yeah, of course.
There was nowhere in Ashburnham actually to watch the game. So I went to the 99 in Fitchburg.
Nice.
And I watched the game at the bar. I watched the second period at the bar. And the best part.
You get some free popcorn?
Yes. But the best part was, so I turned 26 2 weeks ago now, and I needed a new license. And I ordered one. But
are you going to say you ordered like yourself a birthday cake at the 99? Or you told them it was your birthday?
Sing to me, peasant. Yes. Sing to me. No, that was not the case. But the case was my license is expired that I have. And I didn't realize that. So I was like, I'll have a beer, just one, watch the game, have a burger. Nope, couldn't. And I don't look particularly old, so it's not like, I have a beard or anything where they can be like, well, we know you're over 21.
The key is to looking old and decrepit, yeah.
Yes, I look like I'm 14, so that did not go well. So I had a ginger ale instead, which was much cheaper, so I didn't mind that.
It's like spicy water.
It is spicy water. I have a ginger ale every single night. So it was a great experience watching the Bruins return at the 99. It was, just felt like home. It always feels like home with the 99. I don't know why they're not a sponsor yet. But we're not going to be talking a ton about that game. Although maybe we'll, put some things in on it. The big news was Don Sweeney's press conference on Sunday. That's where the focus was. That's where there is the most meat on the bone. Couple news and notes. Hampus Lindholm done for the year, most likely. He is not set to return. They need to go in and clean things up, Don Sweeney said this week. Don Sweeney himself does not have to go in and clean out his knee. That'll be a doctor.
What is he? The Minnesota Wild medical staff?
Yeah, I have to say, he's not the Team USA / Minnesota Wild doctor, who Sweeney would not kick into the ground a little bit more, but I think we can do our own assumptions there. McAvoy is out indefinitely. That didn't sound super optimistic for a return this year. So it sounds kind of like we're correct in that both of these guys, we mentioned this hypothetical last week of if they shut both guys down, that pretty much solves your path for you the rest of the season. And Lindholm's the one actually who's like officially done. McAvoy isn't quite officially done yet. But it does seem like the path is charted out, as in, I think they're going for a retool.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at those two injuries and how critical they are. And, even like Lindholm if he was clear and he played and it was at 70% or something like that, would just be an immediate boost because he was so good this year. And I know he had a kind of an off year last year, but I think all things considered, you look at the overall body of work of what he's done here with the Bruins. He's a really impactful player in a lot of different areas, and you've really missed him, whether it's the power play, which it's unfortunate that his first game he gets to run the power play, his kneecap gets fractured. So you miss that. You miss a guy that can play those minutes, a guy that really, I think, elevates Brendan Carlo. And I think that's really kind of hurt. It's not been the best year for Carlo. And I like Brendan Carlo's game, but it just hasn't really been a strong year for him. And that second pairing has kind of been taking on a lot of water without Lindholm out there. But yeah, I just think you look at where this team is right now. And yeah, they're only a point out of the wild card, but it sure feels like once you find out that you're definitely not getting Lindholm back this year. And McAvoy, I mean, why rush him back for
Agreed.
this year?
I think he's probably done for the year.
That is, I think, heavily assumed in terms of how Sweeney kind of mapped that out. There's no need to push either one of those guys. Like maybe if the Bruins were gunning for the playoffs, you hold out Lindholm the rest of the regular season and see where he is in April, but doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. And even if they do make the playoffs, why push him again for what could be just a first round exit? I think the smarter move for both those guys is let them rest up. And much like the team, except that this year has just gone off the rails. It's not your year. Wave the white flag. Punt. Start making moves now to be proactive, right, in terms of this offseason, and especially those two guys who are going to be key pieces of this team and a reason why this team is probably retooling instead of a rebuild or anything like that. Get those two guys healthy, clean slate, and come back to be impactful players next year. Because if the Bruins do bounce back, and it's going to depend a lot on what they do both leading up to March 7th and then obviously this offseason, those two guys are going to play a big part in it. So it sucks, but it almost feels like there's a little bit of like a release where you finally, we can stop talking about what they might do, right? Like it's unfortunate, right? And like, hell, maybe this team just like falls ass backwards into the playoffs anyway, even if they trade off guys.
That would be their luck too. Like they fall in and they miss, it's not a great draft, but they miss
exactly. But it does seem like the writing is on the wall, right? And listen, it stinks. There's nothing better than playoff hockey in Boston. We get excited about it. The fans, the city gets, sucked in, even casual fans buy in. To not have a spring that really would suck, but
no post-game shows with Carl Corzini.
Exactly. What's he going to do with the whiteboard now? Oh. So it's unfortunate, right? But I think having that clarity, right, of this isn't your year. Let's get a head start on this offseason now with, moving assets, trying to, see what younger players can do later on this year if you call them up and see if you have some clarity of what they can provide. Maybe slip into like the top 10 of the draft, right? If you continue to kind of struggle, and I don't think the Bruins outright tanking, but if you're without McAvoy and Lindholm and you're moving assets and you're bringing up guys that could be solid, and Merkulov and Lessel, maybe they run with it or maybe they don't. But if they struggle, you know what you have in them. And also like you maybe are losing some more games. And maybe that's the difference between the 13th overall pick and the 8th overall pick. So it stinks. It's unfortunate, but I think it's the right call for them to do. And it's all about what they do now to get a head start on this summer, because I just think you look at this team and as frustrating as this year has been, I think there's absolutely a path for them to get right back to being competitive. Contender, we'd have to see. I think that's, you might need to like hit on your first round pick and have some more supplemental stuff in maybe 2-3 years. Your new look supporting cast kind of can elevate your already pretty solid core. But I think for right now, it stinks, but it's also somewhat intriguing. It's a little bit exciting to see just what they do, and it could go off the rails even further. But this is a unique opportunity the Bruins are in right now. It's not an ideal one, but it seems like at least they're all in the same boat and know what they need to do these next couple of months to really kind of right the ship and kind of make the most of what has been a pretty shitty year, Evan.
I was going to say, and I think the one saving grace in all this is they seem to get it. They do, from what Don Sweeney said, they seem to get what they need to do. And I know there are fans out there who want this team to blow the whole thing up, to trade Pastrnak and trade McAvoy and trade Swayman.
You're going to suck for 10 years.
That ain't it. That ain't it. You don't want that. I promise you, you don't want that. It is the look around the league. That's all. I implore you. Look at the Sharks. Look at the Sabres. Look at what the Blackhawks are going through right now. You don't want that.
Even the Red Wings are maybe making gains this year, but even then, they like fired their coach. They've had all these struggles. Montreal, a team that, like Detroit, is an original six, wants to be good and competitive, and they just can't get everything together. Look at the Blackhawks, who fell ass backwards into a generational talent. And like they are so shitty. They're worse with Connor Bedard.
And they're screwing them up.
And veterans are like who you'd bring in. And that would make sense, right? If you're a team that has so many young players, like, all right, let's bring in the Folignos, the Taylor Halls, surround them with veteran guys. Maybe we don't make the playoffs, but it'll help them all in the long run. All the veterans want to leave because they're such a shit show and they suck. Like, you're going to fall into really ugly cycles if you fully rebuild.
Seth Jones is about to be traded.
Yeah, exactly. Be careful what you wish for in that case. And again, if you're the Bruins, you've gotten the easy part or the most difficult part out of the way, that you still have a core of McAvoy, Swayman, who has not been the strongest year, but I'd like to imagine he's due for a bounce back after this year.
I would
And
agree.
a 60-goal scorer in David Pastrnak. Like, you've got your superstars in place, signed long term before the cap jumps up. Like, you've already gotten the difficult part of the way. It's all about how you change the rest of the core and the rest of the supporting cast around them. That is kind of the daunting challenge for this team.
Agreed. And Sweeney said yesterday, quote, historically, we've been pretty aggressive and our team has been in a position. I think we'll take a much more cautious approach as we approach the deadline. That being said, if there are opportunities to improve our team now and certainly moving forward, whether that's positional shifts or other teams trying to identify what we might have as a strength, we will look at all opportunities to improve our team now, but more importantly, moving forward. The key there is certainly moving forward, and most importantly, moving forward, as in draft picks, as in younger players, as in prospects, and as in players who you could somehow acquire. And I think this is probably the most doubtful that they're able to get, because this would require giving up more, but a player who has, tenure left on their contract, who's going to help you for more than 2 or 3 years. That's hard to get. That doesn't always get moved at the deadline. Those are kind of random deals. But the key there is futures and draft picks. And we've harped on this obviously for years, but they've given away a lot of picks. Like we I think everyone harps on them for missing on picks and not having a ton of high-end draft picks to show for the picks they have made, but they haven't made a lot of picks. If you don't make a lot of picks, you're likely not going to get a lot of talent. That's how that works. So their problem isn't so much drafting. I mean, they've certainly had their draft issues. I'm not saying they're without that, but the big thing is they've given away a lot of picks to compete, which is the price of doing business. Well, at some point, the chickens are going to come home to roost, and that's what's happening right now. We're seeing that the depth pieces have not been there, and it's forced them to go out and sign free agents who haven't really worked out, and so on and so forth. So I think if they can, and it sounds like they are intent on doing this, if you can move guys who aren't, Pastrnak, Swayman, and McAvoy, and you can move guys around those guys who can get you picks or prospects, I think you're listening on everybody right now.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think other than, as you said, those key cogs, those franchise pieces, you have to augment a whole lot of this roster, right? And if it means, the pending UFAs are the ones that make the most sense, right? The Fredericks, Geeky's an interesting case. I know he's an RFA, so you have that wrinkle into it. You got to figure out what you want to do with Brad Marchand, whether it's, I imagine they go to him, see what the contract is, and I'm sure if they want to work on a deal that's a cheaper contract that keeps him here long term, but also frees up more cap space, I think that's also probably part of it too. Or also if Marchand doesn't want to be here for a retool. Again, like, I still think this team can kind of get right back at it next year, but if there is some hard decisions that have to be made, maybe Marchand would rather just chase a cup somewhere else, which, if that's the case, it'd be unfortunate that he would end his career elsewhere, but you would probably get a nice return for him. I still feel like a guy like Marchand, especially when you look at this as a seller, like, this isn't really it's not going to be a whole lot of sellers. There's so many teams that are kind of bottlenecked in the standings. I don't feel like there's multiple teams that are just going to be open for business, I would say. Like, even there's like the teams that are below the Bruins in the standings, but there's a lot of teams that like have no business selling anyway, right? Like, the San Jose Sharks aren't like moving to Foley or someone. Like, they knew they were going to be bad this year, right? Like, there's guys like that aren't really being sold or anything like that. So if you're the Bruins and you're moving Marchand, I saw people say like he'd be like a second round pick or something like that. I don't know how like it'd be anything different from like what the Rangers got and like to give up Rick Nash, who was 34 at the time, like a first round pick, some player who may not move the needle, but an NHL player and a prospect who ends up being pretty useful for them in Ryan Lindgren. Like, if you can get a return like that, I don't think that's out of the question. I know Marchand's 36, but for a desperate team that, could use a guy that has that, experience, Stanley Cup pedigree, a guy who's still on pace for 28 goals. He may not be the same player he was a few years ago, but that is also something to consider. I think all those things kind of factor into it as well. But yeah, it's unfortunate for the Bruins, right, in terms of moving off some of these pieces, but it has to be done in order to restock that draft capital, and that carries over to a guy like Charlie Coyle, who, if you think that his best years are behind him at his age, and you can find a suitor for him, I think he's a guy that a lot of teams would probably covet in terms of what he could provide as like the 3C for a playoff run. And if you move him, get draft capital while also shedding the $5.25 million off the cap, that also can go a long way as well. So it's all about, I think, recouping draft capital, obviously, but also if we're able to further, free up cap space this summer, because whether it's acquiring contracts, signing guys in free agency, which I don't think you should just try to fix all your issues through free agency again. But if it means swinging hockey trades during the summer, you're going to need to have some extra cap room to take on contracts or what have you. Like, look at like what the Capitals did, and they're kind of the blueprint of what teams that feel like their window's closing can do to kind of keep it ajar for another 4 or 5 years. And a lot of it was having flexibility with their cap, especially with LTIR, stuff like that. But they had the money to then take a flyer on a guy like Pierre-Luc Dubois. They had the ability to take on like Jacob Chikrin, stuff like that. So having that cap flexibility is going to just open a lot more doors for this team going into the summer.
I want to dive deeper into what you kind of just mentioned there of guys like Coyle and Carlo and Marchand and what you could get and what you should be trying to get and what the trajectory of this team is, not just the rest of this year. I think we know that, but what it's going to be next year and in future years, because you do have a core. But first, our friends over at Prizepicks. Prizepicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prizepicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long over at Prizepicks. Prizepicks, the best place to get action on sports in more than 30 states. So if you're not even, not just in Mass, but you've got California, you got Texas, you got Georgia, you got Florida. Prizepicks is the best place to get real money sports action. Prizepicks invented the flex play. You know that? Prizepicks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. And Prizepicks now offers MasterCard for quick and easy deposits into your account this sports season. Bruins-wise, Pastrnak, 14-game point streak. That he's just continuing to go. Keep it on. And Morgan Geekie, by the way, also still red hot even after the break. So I'd say those are the 2 that I'd put my Prizepicks money on. For sure. So download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app, use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prizepicks, run your game. Run your game. So in terms of who gets dealt and where this team's headed, Marchand is the most complex. I think it's the most interesting one. Obviously, he's been here forever. He's the captain. I think he does have legitimate value. I've mentioned the Avalanche all year as a team who would make sense for him. You have the Nathan McKinnon end of it. They are going for a cup. They're going to be contenders for a while. Obviously, they just got Natchez. The Rantanen stuff down in Carolina right now, real weird. Ooh.
Shocking. Who could have seen Tom Dundon being not willing to pay a guy over
cheap motherfucker?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, seriously. As soon as that trade went down, I was at the BU-BC game at a game. That's when that news went down. And immediately, of course, everyone losing their mind. And same boat, wild trade. But then I was like, not a goddamn chance Carolina's paying that guy that money.
No, they're not re-signing him. Never,
No.
ever. And I think Rantanen realizes that and is like, trade me, which they traded Natchez. They traded their
which
top
they weren't
point
gonna
getter at the time.
And they weren't gonna re-sign Natchez, so they got that out of the way too. So they cleared off their books to probably not sign anyone. Again, they keep on drafting random guys. They're gonna draft a kid who's over in the KHL right now, who's gonna be a 40 goal scorer, and then he'll go somewhere else 6 years down the road.
To the Oakland A's.
Pretty much, yeah, honestly. But that is something where very interesting to see what happens with him. Also, if you're the Bruins, again, free up cap space, maybe you're well, we can't sign any centers. We can't draft any of them. Let's just be the Vegas Golden Knights before they got Eichel and just load up on the wing. Maybe they'll throw fucking $14 million at Rantanen.
That could work.
I think, again, as you know, people probably like, don't waste your money on these guys, or like, what are you doing? All these things. Having that cap flexibility gives you the options to explore a whole lot of different avenues, and maybe that is one they take. If like there's no center on the market that can move the needle, if you can like have the seventh or eighth pick and getting,
please work with Elias Lindholm.
yeah,
Please work with Elias Lindholm.
or maybe it's like, fuck it, like listen, you know, Zaka and Pasternak work well together. The ceiling of that line might be limited with Zaka, but if he's got Rantanen with him, that line's going to be that line. You don't have to worry about it, right? So, again, I know I kind of threw you off course there, but I think it all comes down to just the cap flexibility where if you have a lot of money to work with, and again, with the cap jumping up and you have so many key guys already signed, you could, you know, explore hockey trades to bring in guys and take on contracts. You could have the ability to throw the bag at a guy like Rantanen if that's the case. Like you can do a lot of different things to kind of really retool your team, but it all starts with right now and what you can do to clear out a lot of space. Because I wrote about it in a column yesterday. Like the Bruins, again, are in a better spot than most teams looking at a retool, but there is just a lot of bloat on this roster that just needs to be cleared out.
A lot of fat that needs to be trimmed.
Exactly. So that is the biggest key right now. It's just getting a clean slate. Because I think even if like we go into this offseason and you have like the depth chart and you got a lot of like X's in spots, there's vacancies all over the place, but you have a lot of money and you've cleared out contracts, you're in a pretty good spot, I would say.
I agree, because then you can, and again, I don't love the idea of bringing in guys through free agency, but that's top guys. This is, you know, if you're getting depth guys in free agency, that works. Now, Lindholm and Zadorov have played like depth guys in free agency, but you did not sign them to be depth guys at all. Marchand, though, getting back to that, I
went on the tangent.
No, I brought up the Rantanen thing, and we discussed it. That's fine. We're on a podcast. We have no time limit. We can go all day. Marchand's interesting because Sweeney's mentioned, his goal is to have Marchand be a Bruin for life. Marchand has mentioned that in the past. Sweeney said yesterday, that's always been my ultimate goal. We've been in negotiations with Brad and communicating with him throughout the year. We'll have to have a conversation now that Four Nations is over and sit down with Brad and his representatives and have a clear path in the next 2 weeks as to what his final outcome will be. Knowing what we know now, which is what we've believed all along, which is that they're not headed for the playoffs this year. Does Brad Marchand want to be on a team that's retooling? Now, we've both mentioned, hey, you can get back and compete next year. Are you a contender, though? Are you contending for the cup? I don't know. You're in the playoff picture next year. At least you should be. But cup team, I don't know about that. And Marchand's 36. He just got done with Four Nations, which I'm sure he enjoyed thoroughly, of competing for a championship and winning a championship and all of that. And do you really want to go through a retool the next couple of years? Because again, you even look at the retool back in the 2010s, what the Bruins did in 14, or, in 15 and 16 and 17. They had the centers in place, they had the number one D in place, they had the number one goalie in place. Like you had all that, and you still didn't make the playoffs for 2 years. And then even the year you finally did, you were one of the final seeds.
You needed a crazy run to get in.
Exactly. So does he want to be here? And also, you can probably get a good amount for him. You mentioned the Rick Nash trade from a couple of years ago. And, if you can get a first and a legit prospect for him, how do you say no to that? And I know, we've mentioned leadership before, and his leadership is great, and there aren't a lot of veterans in that room. I agree, but this is kind of the perfect storm for you to move on. And it's crazy to think, but when you look at all the franchise pillars the Bruins have had over the last 20 years, Bergeron, Chara left. I mean, they didn't get anything for him. They basically said, we really don't want you back. But Bergeron and Krejci and Rask and all these big guys. You can even go into guys like Torrey Krug. You got nothing for them. Nothing. They retired, or they left on their own, whatever it was. You have a chance to get something here. And I don't think it tarnishes his legacy here. I don't think we're going to look back and be like, I think we all will look back and go, well, that was the situation they were in and they had to do it. And if it gets you first and a high-end prospect, I don't know. I think I'm fine with that.
Yeah,
but it has to be for the right thing. If it's not a high return, or if Marchand's like, no, I want to stay here and I'll take less to stay, then that's different.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to what Marchand wants. If he wants to go somewhere else, I think the Bruins will happily oblige there, knowing that they can probably get a return. It's something that Marchand wants. If Marchand's like, yeah, you know what, I'll stay. I'll sign 3 years at $2.75 million. I'll take a cheap deal and do that. Then
that's an easy.
If Marchand's like, I want to be here for 3 years at $6.5 million, I get a slight bump up because I've been on a cheap contract. That's when you have to confront those hard truths, right? So I think the first thing you have to do in that situation, because I agree, I think it's kind of like those little charts where it's like the different bubbles of like, it's like the choose your own adventure. If Marchand says yes, you know, like one of those. If Marchand says no and he wants to stay, then a lot of it probably gets solved.
How much is it going to be?
How much is it going to be, right? If he's signing, because if he signs for another 2-3 years and he can still be a like middle six player, and you save a little bit of cap room and you have a veteran guy still in place, and if you do this retool correctly, he's more of a supporting player as opposed to like a featured guy. Like Marchand, like at this point, is still a good player, but he shouldn't be like your top line driving guy. And I think you even start like, you see when he's at his best sometimes, it's like when he's not having to be the guy, he can just be the shit stirring, like, you know, middle six player that provides energy, he can score you 25 goals a season. There's a lot of value in that, especially if he signs here for a cheaper contract to kind of close out his career. So it all comes down to what he wants, especially with the contract. If he doesn't want to be part of retool, then yeah, it's kind of answered right there, because you can, I think, get something good for him. But it's like, would you rather, if you are trying to get right back at it next year, would you rather have Marchand around for a deal like that, like at $3 million a year, or would you move him anyway for like a first round pick? You got to weigh those options, but that is a guy where I don't necessarily view him as like part of the bloat, right? If you are really kind of overhauling things, yes, you can get a good return for him, but he's also, I don't think, a net negative or a guy that can't help you next year, or even as he continues to kind of decline a little bit. I think there's a lot of value for what he signs, especially with a contract. But if it is a pretty hefty deal that he's looking for, that really does complicate matters.
And here's the thing with him and this team. If they just spent a ton of money this past offseason, they believed that this team was going to be better. And I think when you look at a lot of different things, you should expect them to be better next year. I mean, Elias Lindholm should be better next year. Jeremy Swayman should be better next year. You'll have a full, good season from Pasternak. You're going to have free agent acquisitions over the summer. Maybe you do some hockey trades. They might feel like they're, healthy Hampus Lindholm, healthy Charlie McAvoy. They might feel like they're going to be right back in the cup contention window. Whether we think that's correct or not, they might think that they are. And he helps you contend for a cup. As you said, like as a middle six guy. And if
you
they
need
feel
a 20 goal scorer, you don't have a whole lot of them, and you can't you don't find a lot of them either. So
you don't find them, and you don't have them. You didn't replace Jake DeBrusk. We've talked about this a lot. The wing depth after David Pastrnak on this team is brutal. That's why we were advocating for them to re-sign Morgan Geekie like a month ago, because you've got nothing on the wings. So you take anything you can get. You know what you're getting out of Marchand. You know what you're getting. And he might be in the wrong role as, top, guy's got to be second on the team in points. I don't think you should be expecting that. But if they do, sign a bunch of guys and reload, like he would help you, more than he would not being on the roster and just having a first and prospects. It just comes down to how realistic are they with what they're going to be next year. Do they feel they can jump right back into it? That's really what it comes down to. But again, I still say if someone knocks your socks off for the Marchand trade, I have a tough time saying no. Like, because you could make a ton of progress with a retool. I mean, if you got a first and a high end prospect for Marchand, maybe even throw in like a younger roster player too. And I know this is getting a little outlandish, but if a team did that,
if Otto calls for fucking Brady Tkachuk, then you do that. Like,
well, yes, it's a little different. That's a little different. Yes. Let's not get crazy here. We could do a long time on the Brady Tkachuk to Boston train. I think that'll be one topic we discuss many times when we're looking for what to talk about on this show in April and May. But let's say it was just, all right, let's just do a first round pick and a good prospect for Marchand. I think that's a fair return. that helps move along your retool. That's 2 higher end guys in your system now who you expect to come and contribute in 2 to 3 years. Now, that's not immediate returns and like, oh, they're in the lineup next year, but I do think that helps move things along. So I think there's pros and cons to the Marchand thing. I don't think there's a set, I think is what you said. It's a bubble. It's if this, then that. If that, then this.
The one thing I would say though too is there's a lot of people who are like, well, just trade him and then he'll sign back this year. No, you those things don't happen. Like if that is happening,
fun in fantasy land, but not
yeah. And a player does get traded, and they maybe the grass is greener on the other side, but also like when you get traded, there is part of that severance that comes with it, right?
Yes. So, I was gonna say though, if he did say like, I'll just re-sign back here in the summer, retire his number immediately. What a move that would be by now.
It's if you are hoping that plays out, it's very few and far between of that thing actually happening. So if you do trade him, I don't think he's coming back here.
No, I don't think that either. In terms of other guys, I mean, we're going to talk more in depth about the deadline as things go along. I think today the big thing is we do have clarity on where they're headed, which is retool. I mean, you look at Frederick, he's gone. I cannot, Sweeney basically said as much. I'm trying to find the quote right now. He mentioned with the draft, I'm going to be cautious as it relates to the draft as we make moves, acquire and restock. And we find players that are a little further along and identify them properly. All the above are part of the equation. And then when it came to UFAs, it's unlikely we'll move forward with things other than maybe Brad's when he was talking about UFAs to be. You never know because it takes one phone call for things to change. In terms of UFAs, that's Trent Frederick, Justin Brazeau, Cole Koepke, Riley Tufte, Parker Wotherspoon, and Michael Callahan are all UFAs. Frederick obviously has the most value. We've talked about him a number of times. I'd assume he's gone. If you can get something for Brazeau, like, would a 3rd or 4th round pick be insane? I mean, I'm fine with that. Like,
him cratering like this second half of the year has killed him. Because I thought he'd probably be worth like maybe a low or a late 3rd or something earlier on this year. But like, I don't know. At that point, like he's not offering you much of anything. Once he got 1 goal and like 2 or 3 points in his last 18 games or something, like.
He was the one guy like producing it the first couple months of the year.
Yeah. If this team didn't have Brazeau and like Cole Koepke and Mark Kastelic at the start of the year, they'd already they might be going for James Higgins at this point. Shit.
Go for Higgins, Michael Misa.
If they like completely like bottomed out or they somehow like are in like the lottery range and they get like a high pick and get Higgins, our video of us just joking about James Higgins in September is going to do numbers because
crazy.
We're just laughing the entire time talking about it'll never happen, and then what happens? What happens, Evan?
I would be incredible. I am all for it. I hope to God they get James Higgins. That would solve a lot of problems. I do think James Higgins needs another year at BC for sure. I talked about this with you at the Bean Pot. We talked about it for a while. Like he's not a one and done. This is someone who needs another year of development, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if they could get a Higgins, our takes would look outstanding. All that time that people were like, making fun of us for doing the James Higgins to the Bruins routine. Like, I think we had like them doing some huge trades at the beginning of the year to get higher picks. We didn't talk about trading Swayman, did we? That wasn't in that. I forget how we tied them to Higgins.
Shit, maybe it was, right?
I forget how we tied them to Higgins. I have to
imagine that was part of it with the contract where I think there was like a legitimate chance like shit they might just trade him, which at that point like
I think it was like trade him to San Jose for their first, which will be low or high, and so that's how you get James Higgins. Because I think my thing, and people can correct me, I have to go back and like listen. We don't listen to these again. We're moving on. But I think I mentioned like, they already have Celebrini and Smith. They don't need another number 1 center. They're going to be probably the number 1 team in the lottery, which they aren't. It's Chicago right now. But, like they don't need Higgins, so they're going to trade him. They do need a goalie. So that's how that's all going to work. But Bruins might just fall ass backwards into Higgins in general because Higgins also is not the number 1 guy anymore.
Yeah, so not even like number 2, I think, right? I think I saw the like NHL.com had like 3 or 4. It was what's his name, Schaefer, the defenseman, who's really good. I think he's like a lock now to go number one. And then there's like Misa. There's that Porter Martone, I think his name. He's like a winger. So
Matt Porter.
Again, yeah, exactly. He can do it all. No, I do think that. Yeah, I don't think the Bruins are getting James Higgins, but makes it interesting. We'll see what happens. Getting that lottery, you never know. It would be the most Bruins thing ever. I mean, look at the Blackhawks, dude.
Like, I know.
Makes you think. It also would be like the Bruins' luck that like the year they would get the first pick, it'd be like the best. I think right away, like the best player is like a defenseman.
Yes, I know. Can't even get the center that you want. You could do the old trade back, trade the number one pick for like
they're the inverse of the Patriots. It's like, no, we want like the third pick. Where you need, like...
they actually just do the opposite. They play themselves worse into the first pick. I said this last week to you on here. The Bruins are only 6 points away from being the second worst team in the East. Pittsburgh is right now the second worst team in the East. Obviously out west. Actually, I take it back. San Jose is the worst team. I don't know why I thought they were better than they are. San Jose is the worst team. Yeah. I think it goes San Jose, Chicago, Nashville, Buffalo. Those are by far the worst. But then, so that's okay. I can't believe we're having this conversation. But that's 4 teams who are pretty much locked into the top 4 spots. However, then you get into like Pittsburgh with 55 points, Seattle with 54, Anaheim 57. You've only got 61. You're not far off. Did you see them Saturday night against the Ducks? If they're without Lindholm and McAvoy, it's not crazy to think that they are pick 7, pick 6. Yeah.
And again, even that is
losing, but it's not out of the question.
Yeah, and again, like if you have like the guys like Higgins and Misa and those players that I think are probably the tier above, but anywhere in like that top 10, if you're like able to get, and again, like I think we're going to have a lot of time to look at this draft and look at guys to keep tabs on. But, there's a guy like Anton Frundell, who's a Swedish centerman. Roger McQueen, who I think is out in the WHL. He's like a 6'5" center who's putting up points.
Bruins are like him.
Yeah.
Him.
Yeah. Jake O'Brien's OHL centerman. Like there's a lot of guys that have top 6 potential, like legitimate top 6 potential that you can get. So again, if you're able to drop a few of these games, move assets, and you're able to have a lot of cap space, have the means and the ability to really augment your roster, and you can have a guy like a McQueen or a O'Brien or someone like that in the system moving forward. That, again, there's no guarantee. This team has struggled to do that, but if you do have one of those guys in your system and you're able to add another second-round pick or a late first or something, and it means you have a scoring wing that is lighting it up in the OHL or Hockey East that you can add to your system, or a high floor right shot D that, as you brace for, life without like Brendan Carlo down the road, whether it's trade or just moving forward, if you have a guy that's a big bodied right shot defenseman in your system, like this draft gives you an opportunity to really restock and add some intriguing pieces. And it's not like, I think you have to like do a complete tear down to do it. You have a lot of assets that can, I think, get you some useful draft capital. And even if this isn't the most stacked draft, seems like is the case, top 10, you'll be able to get, I think, a good pick, and a lot of centermen are around that like 5 to 12 spots right now. That should really be an intriguing ad for the Bruins.
And the draft's in LA this year. Just got announced. Yep. It's in LA, so there's that. In terms of like some of the guys we mentioned earlier, Frederick, Carlo, Coyle. I mean, Frederick, I think, is like most likely gone. Carlo and Coyle, I think they're going to listen on. None of those guys are getting you, a top 10 pick or maybe even a first round pick, but they're getting you a second for sure. So like, that's one of my biggest things. I think priority number 1 of this deadline is just get back in that second round. And like, I think Carlo is really valuable. I think Brandon Carlo I don't want to trade him. I like him a lot. I think he's a terrific leader. I think he is outstanding when you put him with a good left shot defenseman as well, and he can play a shutdown role. I also think after this 4 Nations, people saw on a national scale what Jacob Slavin can do, and I'm not comparing them. Slavin is obviously the best shutdown defenseman in the league, but Carlo has a history of playing a similar kind of shutdown game, and no one's going to be able to go get Jacob Slavin. Carlo's not like that far off. I mean, I know Slavin is better, clearly.
Slavin is the S tier of that very unique brand of stay-at-home defenseman where like not overly physical, but stick work, the body positioning. Yep. Like Slavin is far and away the best one in that, but that's kind of, you see that like what Slavin can do. It's Carlo's kind of a few steps behind that, a few tiers below that, but that is people who look at Carlo and like, he doesn't hit, he can't do enough. Look at what Slavin, like those kind of defensemen, they're not really all that common, that skill set, but when they're playing to their strengths, they are negating every single scoring chance that comes their way. Those guys are really coveted, especially at this point, for teams that are looking for a little bit more stability on their back end, which I agree. If you are moving Carlo, which you do weigh that issue of like, how do you replace him necessarily? Like just in terms of a 20-minute guy on the right side of your defense, but you'd get a lot for him. I think if you paired him and like Korpisalo with a team that needs some stability, both in net and especially on defense, be kind of an intriguing package, whether it's draft picks or like a hockey trade, like whether it's a team like Edmonton, a team like Columbus that's on the up and up that could really use like a top 4D and a lot of stability in that. Not saying that Korpisalo is going to win the Vezina, but I think he's been what you would expect. I think he's been a solid NHL goalie, and I think he could probably help out teams that are really taking on water goaltending wise moving forward. So that could be an intriguing package, I think.
I agree. I think Korpisalo is another. I think with the Slavin Carlo thing, you mentioned like S tier, it's sort of like, if you can't watch Breaking Bad, but you want to watch a show that has like, a protagonist who has kind of the secret life. It's like Carlo is Dexter, yes. like it's the next tier down.
He's Ozark.
Ozark's a great one, yes. Or if like you want to watch a funny sitcom, like Slavin is Seinfeld, but then like that next tier, it's like Brandon Carlo's like New Girl, yes. Like great show, not the best, but a very good show. I did see, I forget who it was. It was one of those like magazines ranked like the best characters of the last 25 years, and Selena Meyer won from Veep. Like she was number one, which I loved Selena, but like I was shocked that she was number one. Like really?
I was a fan. I think
she's terrific, but there's Walter White. Like there's been some crazy big characters over the last 25 years. Selena Meyer's top 10. I don't know if she's number one. And I love Julia Louis-Dreyfus. But you have pieces on this roster who can get you seconds, maybe a late first. Like I again, people forget how insane these deals can get around the deadline. But I think we'll be having this conversation a lot more, especially that draft conversation. Who should the Bruins target in the top 10? A lot of watching film. Unfortunately for me, no New Englanders
I know coming up are going to earn that. The strongest local representation this draft, unfortunately.
It's not. And I mean, if the Bruins did get a late first from someone, Carter Amico would be a legitimate guy.
If you had a second round pick, I would love a guy like Carter Amico. Gonna go to BU, 6'5", from Maine, right shot D. I think has a little bit more mobility in his game, even though he's a bigger guy.
Skater. But he's a good skater.
Yeah, but even if he is just a no frills stay-at-home guy, that's a lot of value. If in 2 years from now he can be your third pairing D and he can move up eventually into that role, a lot of value in a second round pick in terms of a right shot D. I wouldn't be surprised if they do recoup second and third round picks, that they look for kind of a projectable high floor kind of talent like that.
He's high floor. The only problem with him is injury. He's had a knee injury last year. He's in one ended his season this year with the program. But everything I've heard is good. This team. Yeah, he would fit. Everything I've heard is good so far. So I think things should be good for next year at BU. But we'll see. Not a lot of new, and this is not a great draft for New England talent either. I mean, New England natives. Higgins is from Hauppauge, New York. What can people look forward to from you, Connor?
Yeah, you can read all my stuff over at boston.com and the Boston Globe. We have covered every step of the way this Bruins season, especially leading up to the trade deadline. Should be a lot to talk about, I think, both before the deadline, after the deadline, even as like we go through this stretch and this team might look pretty different. I think it's going to be really fascinating to see what this team does moving forward as they try to set off this, what I think all expect now to be a retool going into this summer. So you can read all of my stuff over the Globe and Boston.com. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, X, whatever you call it, you can at Conor Ryan _93.
Go do all that. That's Conor Ryan. I'm Evan Marinofsky. You Bruins Beat listeners. Have a great rest of your week.